Okay, guys, what is going on? Welcome to the Lucid Path. We are diving into some mental health education today. Um, we have my friend Dylan Alexander here, and he is an expert in mental health and other things as well, other teaching styles like math and science. And I'm really excited to have him here. Dylan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. So my name is Dylan, and before I go into this presentation, I basically make content on what I call high performance happiness. So for all you self-improvement junkies out there, it's the stuff that you're interested in. If you really want to get into kind of living at peace with the world, physical health, mental health, all that kind of stuff, I go into that and I basically teach people what I've learned over the course of my life and what has worked for me. And so if you enjoy that, you'll enjoy this.
Mhm. Love that, man. Um, cool. Well, hope you guys have your pen and pencil ready, your your pen and paper ready to take some notes, man. I know Dylan has some great stuff for us. So without further ado, man, you want to take us away?
Fantastic. Awesome. So yes, hello, I'm Dylan. I make content on mainly YouTube and Instagram about high performance happiness, right? So what I do is I go around giving talks about things like what I'm going to do today, which is what I call the bulletproof mind. Okay. So the bulletproof mind is a framework that I've built up over I don't know how long, a long period of time, basically. And it's these 6 steps. Okay. One, the locus of control. Two, taming the beast. Three, the philosopher's lens. Four, the power of now. Five, the two selves. And six, welcome to heaven. Okay. Quite cryptic titles, very interesting titles, but we'll break them down as we go along. And today, I want to go through one of them, and that will be the locus of control. But before I do that, I'll tell you a little bit of a story about my experience so far in life. So, to begin with, I was quite a miserable kid, right? You can see that in this picture here. I wasn't too terribly happy with how life was going for me, right? It was not a pleasant experience. I'm not making this a pity party. I'm just trying to make a point here. I was extremely sensitive to the world around me, right? Life wasn't such a nice time, right? I was extremely affected by the world around me, and basically I was very sensitive, right? And it was not as if the world around me was particularly bad. Like I lived a decent life. I wasn't like, I had my both my loving parents around. I had brothers and things like this, and it was good. I had food to eat and a roof over my head. And I was grateful for that. But for some reason, I was a bit of a crybaby, right? A bit sensitive to the world around me. And I had the typical symptoms of, depression and stress. And I don't know if you know this, but typically when someone is very stressed, they will get a lot of nightmares, sleepwalking and sleep talking. And it was bizarre to me because I would never remember any of this stuff, but my mother would tell me the next morning, "Do you remember waking up yesterday and walking to the kitchen to get a glass of water and things like this?" And apparently I would say things in my sleep and things like that. And obviously you're not aware of it because you're sleeping, but it was very bizarre to me. And well, I guess I don't know myself, but I know from the people around me who lived with me and saw me sleep and saw me get up in the night that I did these things. And apparently, they're very highly correlated with stress. So I was basically very high strung and easily irritated. And I had a brother, an older brother at the time, who found this quite entertaining, right? And so I make a joke here. True evil is found in 10-year-olds, right? And I want to make it clear, I'm joking there. I'm not actually being serious. But yeah, that was my life, right? Well, we lived in the same room. And so it was very, very annoying for me because I was very, very OCD and very kind of like particular about my things. And so I was quite easy to annoy. And so, naturally, as as people do, you can poke and prod at people and get a reaction out of them. If it's kind of entertaining, then it's kind of like, okay, it's kind of something that's done, right? I'm not going to say it's right or wrong, but it's something that's done, right? And that was pretty much our relationship. He knew really well how to push my buttons and he did it often. And I got angry, like very predictably, and I had a very short temper. And so me in my life, I just didn't know what to do with that. I was a kid. I was just like, how do I kind of get through this? The only thing I knew what to do was get angry. And so there was nothing else for me in that kind of way, right? And life wasn't so. sympathetic to my woes either, right? I had a few bad teachers and bullies at school and a lack of friends. And I guess that kind of personality doesn't really line up with that in terms of being sensitive and things like this. It kind of attracts that kind of, I guess bad actors in life that, you know, might not be the best people in the world. And so, yeah, I mean, life didn't kind of turn around and say, oh, we know you have it tough, so let's be kind to Dylan here. It was definitely an effort from myself that was needed or required there, but I didn't know it at the time. I didn't know it at the time. And I hated my life. That's for me, that's a bit cringy to say, but I just want to be honest here, right? I had a journal at the time and it was just literally a Word document on my laptop. And it was a record of me and my thoughts and feelings when I was writing it at that time. I was about 13, 14, maybe younger than that actually. And I would write these things in my kind of document. And it was me kind of moaning about, little things like how my mum is so annoying, my brother's so annoying, things like that. And looking back, quite a lot of it is just me moaning about how awful life was. And I remember distinctly that feeling I had at that kind of time. It was very kind of, again, to kind of bring a comedy aspect to it and kind of laugh at it looking back, it was kind of like an emo phase that I had when I was a teenager. And yeah, I mean, it's it's good to laugh at it now. And I'll talk about that as well, how to kind of laugh at, potentially traumatic events in your past. But at the time, it was very real for me. It was very like, you know, it seems funny, but genuinely, it wasn't. It was like I genuinely believed that my life was worse than other people's. And again, looking back as well, I think, I live in a first world country. I'm so lucky to have, food and water and everything like that. And that kind of comparison comes into what I'm talking about today as well. But at the time, I had none of that perspective. I had none of that kind of like outside of myself kind of thinking. I just knew that my life was bad. I didn't really think to look at other people or look at how my life compares to other people's, right? I just hated my life and I wrote it down a lot. And the thing I got to say about this is I wish I had a copy of that now so I could, kind of use it to teach other people and show people like what I thought. But at some point in my life, I don't know when it was, but later in my teens, I found this document and got so embarrassed that I just deleted the entire file. And well, I guess I'll never have access to that again. But well, I know what was in there, and I know that it wasn't particularly pleasant for for me, right? But one day it all changed, right? And this seems kind of dramatic, and this seems kind of, it seems like a story or a movie or something like that. But I honestly remember there was as a specific moment in time that I had, and well, I was living in a small flat with my family in a small town called Uxbridge. If you know the UK, you might know where there is. And yeah, I wasn't particularly that old. I don't think I was even in high school yet. Yes, I was in high school. So I must have been about 9 or 10 or even younger than that. I don't know what happened to me. I don't know if it was some adult that gave me some advice or some TV show I watched that gave me this epiphany. But I just suddenly realized that I'm in control, right? I can change the situation so that I don't have to react to these potential bullies or people in my life that want to trigger me in a certain way, right? I realized I didn't need to be sensitive, right? Like the majority of my life was up until this point. And I know this is it's really bizarre, this kind of like epiphany, like you wouldn't expect a child to have like a revelation of some sort, but that's what I remember happening, right? I remember specifically the adults around me would tell me at certain points, perhaps things like, oh, you've really changed here. You've really kind of gotten a handle of your anger, right? Because the way it used to be was that, cousins and extended family and things like this, even my nuclear family would know and have a reputation, or I would have the reputation with them of the kid that is really sensitive, right? Like, watch out, Dylan's going to come around. He's going to be really sensitive. He's going to cry about things. I would have the reputation. He's going to get angry really quickly, right? And so that reputation changed, and the adults around me noticed that, and they told me at times like, that's really good. That well done for not getting out. They would like observe perhaps when maybe a brother or a cousin would like poke and prod me in a certain way, and the old me used to react explosively, and then I just wouldn't. And they're like, oh wow, he's completely changed here, right? And it was nice to hear that from the adults around me, and it was a signal of change because maybe I wouldn't have recognized that if people didn't tell me, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, I found that I just didn't need to be sensitive. I didn't need to react in the same way from people around me who were perhaps trying to get a reaction out of me. I could just, shrug it off and just be fine with it. I don't need to kind of have this reaction. I could choose what emotion I feel. And that's a controversial thing, right? That's something I often talk about, and it's one of my more controversial statements. And it's, well, other psychologists agree with this too. It is the fact that you can choose to be happy, right? In certain circumstances, you have control over what you feel despite what happens to you, right? Because bad things happen to everyone, right? But the way you react to it is your choice. And that's something that I kind of, although I didn't understand it to that level at that point, I understood it to some level. I was like, okay, I can choose something to be going on here, right? In terms of my emotions, the way that I experience things, right? And so the journey begins for me, right? I learned many things from that point when I was a kid and I realized that I can control things to now. And some of those learnings are what I'm going to talk about today. And long story short, I found this sense of peace, right? And when I think of peace or attaining enlightenment or whatever this kind of emotion is, I think of characters like this, like Oogway from Kung Fu Panda. And yeah, this is really, I think there's a reason we have these kind of characters in movies like this. And it's because we perhaps aspire to be like these characters who have attained peace or, are at peace with the world. And, you know, we just kind of understand this character immediately without knowing the backstory or anything like that. We just know that nothing annoys Oogway, right? Or if it's not Oogway, it might be if you've watched Avatar: The Last Airbender, it might be Uncle Iroh from that show. Or if you don't know either of these characters, it's just basically a very peaceful, like monk type character, right? Someone who is at peace with the world, doesn't ever get too angry, doesn't ever get too happy even or too sad or anything like that, doesn't really react too much to the negative things happening to him in the world, right? Although I'm not going to claim that I've achieved enlightenment, I feel like I'm at peace with the world in terms of my day-to-day interactions with life, right? Life is still hard, don't get me wrong, but I feel like I've made a dramatic change in terms of my experience of the world. So that's how I came up with kind of summarizing these thoughts over time and building this framework that I've built called the Bulletproof Mind. So I felt like I'd grown up basically. When I was a kid and I had that kind of revelation, I felt like I'd grown up and I had started to be like, try to live this life more and more. And the world around me changed, right? So I would watch the people around me, more specifically kids, and I would think, okay, that kid's like just getting angry very quickly. Perhaps they haven't grown up yet. That was my thesis, right? I kind of like, okay, this kid hasn't grown up yet, but I have, right? And so maybe we're just different in that way. But then I saw adults reacting this way too. Adults would have like a very quick temper. I remember specific people in my life who reacted that way as well. And I was like, okay, then maybe it's not about growing up in terms of age. Maybe it's something else. And I was like, I was rather confused about that concept for a long time because, well, I was a kid and I thought that all adults had this just kind of control sorted out, right? Like, not as if I was perfect at the time or even now, but I had more or less kind of learnt a lesson in terms of controlling emotions. Whereas some people I saw in my life had not, right? And I was really confused about that. I would see people react in anger. So, throwing mugs and plates and crockery and things like this. And well, it was qu quite scary to me. I didn't understand why they would react so explosively to what I perceive to be a small thing. And I realized that at the time, I was like, these people generate fear for the people around them, right? It's like walking on eggshells when you're with them. You can't do anything too, too much or too that might annoy them. You've got to like really stay on guard when you're with them. And the reason I've got this little monster here is because that's how I saw them, right? It was like a monster in my life. Like they weren't actually like different creatures, but they were monsters to me, right? And that's something I really want to pay attention to because that's a big reason why you want to study this kind of stuff. You don't want to be a monster to the people you love, right? To your wife, your kids, the people who are more vulnerable in life. You don't want to be a monster, right? It's it's genuinely quite scary. And that's how I felt, to be perfectly honest with you, when I was a kid. And anxiety as well. This is an emotion I saw a lot of as well when I was a kid, and people perhaps who maybe cried more easily or got sad or like overthought things, making mountains out of molehills. And with this one, I just found that a bit annoying. I know that's a bit funny, but like for me, it was like, okay, this isn't a big deal. Like what's going on here? And as a kid, I just found it annoying, right? But with various emotions like that, I just felt like, are there any other people like me who've kind of like decided to try and be better with emotions? Again, I just want to repeat, I'm not saying I'm the genius here. I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I felt like I was making an effort to be better, whereas other people were not, right? And I thought perhaps they might be like a unicorn, right? I know that this picture is from a movie called Hercules. Most of you might have seen it before. I know Pegasus, this character here, is not a unicorn, but when I think unicorn, I think this character. So allow me that, please. So they do exist, and when you find them, it is incredible, right? When you've achieved some kind of inner peace, and they also have some kind of inner peace, it's incredible, right? Because you just sense from them that they are this kind of person who, well, one, you can feel safe around, and two, they just understand that there's nothing to be, you know, overreactive about, I guess, right? You can tell them anything. You don't have to like censor your words. You don't have to kind of, change the way you act so that they are okay with it. You can just be yourself and they can be themselves. And it's just such a productive kind of zone to be in because you can talk about anything and everything and they're fine with it. And you just know it's just nice. It's safe. It's secure. It's lovely, right? And so
I
it's
just
like this.
I my bad. I just want to say that I have a peace sign on my hand, and
Oh,
you're
nice.
showing hands in the peace one. That was cool.
Nice. Fantastic. That's awesome, man. That's awesome. Is that a tattoo?
Yeah.
Nice. Awesome. Fantastic. So yeah, it feels like this, right? I found this picture. I don't know when I found it, a long time ago, but I saved it because it's what it feels like to be with people like this. Like the caption says, me and my friends posing for an Instagram picture, right? It's just you at peace with the world. I don't know what it is about pandas, but pandas seem to be that kind of animal that just are at peace with the world. They don't really care. They don't care so much that they don't even care about their declining population and their endangered species, and etc., and things like that. It's amazing. It's such a happy place to be, and it's just good for the soul, right? And the effect you have on others as well. It's stunning, right? You become this magnetic individual, right? And I've noticed this in my life. Like genuinely, you feel it. It's not a subtle thing. You begin to kind of accumulate these bits of evidence that show you that this is actually something worth doing, right? People tell me this, right? And not just one time, right? A lot. You're always smiling. You're so easy to talk to. You make me feel safe, right? Things like this, right? And it's quite reassuring that these practices give you that sense of, well, being a person that is, well, like a panda, right? And he doesn't want to be around a panda, right? And it's because in this world of chaos, or in their world of chaos, because they haven't done any work to kind of make their world peaceful or work towards that at least, in their world of chaos, you are as solid as a rock. right? Because we have done these things that contribute towards stability, security, and feeling at peace with the world, to them, we're very stable creatures. We're very peaceful creatures, right? Like those pandas are. Like, for example, like your dog might be. Your dog, typically is a very peaceful creature. It doesn't really, you know, do anything that's, too stressful and things like this. It's generally why we have pets and things like that in life as well. So, enough with the story. How did I do it? Right? Whatever it is that I've done, how did I get there? How do I present myself to be this peaceful person? And how do I achieve that for myself in my mind as well? Right? Because it genuinely feels great, right? And I don't know if I can translate that feeling into words until you experience it. So let me get started with these 6 steps. Okay, so just to remind you again, the 6 steps are the locus of control, taming the inner beast, the philosopher's lens, the power of now, the two selves, and welcome to heaven. So the first one we are going to go through today is called the locus of control, right? And so, first of all, what does locus mean? What does locus of control mean? What are these words? Locus, first of all, is not the insect that you might be thinking about. That is, an insect of plague that might eat crops and things like that. It's not that. It is instead a defined boundary, right? I come from a maths background. I teach maths, and so I know it to be a defined boundary in terms of in the mathematical sense, right? It can be a defined boundary around a point, so a circle like this, a defined boundary between 2 points, so equidistant from these 2 points. There can be a line like this, equidistant from a line, equidistant from some place, generally speaking. So from a point here, from a line, or between two lines, or around a square. It's a defined boundary, right? And so the way I like to think of a locus of control in my life is a boundary around a human being, right? Like a force field around someone, right? So a stick man and a circle around the stick man, right? And inside that sphere or circle is stuff that they can control, and outside is stuff that they can't control, right? And so what the locus of control really studies or really focuses on is the differentiation between those two things, right? So the understanding of what we can control and what we can't control. I like to imagine sometimes if you know any kind of cartoon characters that can have the ability to do force fields or things like that. For me, I like to, I don't know if I've got a picture of this. No, I don't. So it's if you have seen The Incredibles, it's the daughter character. I think her name is Violet, who has the power to do force fields. That's the character I think about when I come to think about this kind of thing, right?
Hmm.
A force field kind of shape around a human being, right? So two concepts here. And this is something I struggled to kind of put together when I studied the locus of control myself. It was because I studied this, and some people mentioned one concept, and some people mentioned the other concept, and I was very confused for a long time until I put the two together and kind of, well, came up with this. I don't know if this is unique to me or maybe someone's mentioned it before, but this for me is something that I had to build myself, right? Two concepts here: the knowledge and the belief. Okay, so let's start with the knowledge. So the knowledge. To illustrate this concept, I have a little story that I'm going to tell you, and it's about a flight. Okay, a a situation that can be a little bit scary, a situation that can be a little bit, it might invoke feelings of fear sometimes, right? So let me just bring up some notes on that because I want to get this story right because I feel like it's a very good analogy to kind of break this down in terms of um, telling or teaching the concept through a story, right? So I want you to imagine yourself on a plane, maybe flying home from somewhere exciting, and the pilot makes an announcement that says, ladies and gentlemen, we're about to go through some turbulence here. Things might feel a bit bumpy for a few moments, but they should return to normal after a few moments, you know? And so there are two different ways you could spend the next few moments on that flight, right? So imagine yourself on the flight, and maybe let's imagine two other people there as well. We'll call them Andy and Bert, right? And these two people are going to represent two different ways to react to the same situation, right? So same flight, same turbulence, same pilot, everything like that, but two different people and two different ways of reacting. Okay. So if we observe these two people, I'll tell you how they react individually, right? So Andy reacts like this. He worries about his arrival time. He worries about his wife and kids at home. He worries whether the pilot will be able to handle the situation. He worries about, even unlikely events like the plane crashing and burning. And in essence, basically what he's worried about is all the stuff which he cannot control. And in doing so, he creates this anxiety for himself, which he can do nothing about, right? He can do nothing to resolve these kind of worries he has in his brain, right? Because he's focused on all the things he can't control. On the other hand, there's Bert, and he reacts like follows. He knows that this turbulence might be affecting his arrival time, right? So the same facts, really. He might be late to his, wife and kids at home. He might, even in that unlikely scenario, the plane might crash and burn, right? And he knows the pilot will have to handle the situation, and there's a chance it could go badly. But the way that Bert thinks about this, he reframes it and tells himself, all of these things are things I can't control. So there's no point in me worrying about them. Me worrying doesn't do anything to fix the problem. So therefore, I can be relaxed, right? So Andy chooses to focus on these things and, in effect, perhaps has the intention that worrying might do something to fix the problem. But Bert, on the other hand, is aware that worrying won't do anything to fix the problem. So he, in knowing that, is able to relax a little bit. So I've got these two characters on the screen now to represent those two kind of people, right? And the funny thing about this picture on the left here, I think this guy's got his legs crossed twice, if you can notice that there. He's very, very anxious, right? But the other guy, he's got the recliner setter on and he's got his feet out and everything like that. And he seems to be very relaxed about the place he's in right now. So we see there in the same flight, the same conditions, there are two ways to react to the same plane journey, right? So we can see there's a choice between what kind of person we choose to be in the scenario, right? And indeed in many other scenarios in life, right? We can say that in some ways, anxiety is a choice, or perhaps the reverse, happiness is a choice. I'm not sure if I've mentioned this yet, but this is one of the more controversial statements that I very much stand by. Happiness is a choice that we can make in life, right? But I fundamentally believe it to be true, right? As you live in life, as you continue to kind of make an effort towards choosing your emotions and deciding how you feel, and perhaps giving it a moment before you choose what feeling you have, you'll notice that this is truer and truer, right? There's a moment, for example, when, in a road rage situation, right? When someone cuts you off or something like that, there's a moment, there's a second in your brain where you can think, okay, I could be really angry about that, or I can be like, okay, maybe I can just, have a laugh at that and just, tell it to my family when I get home. Oh, this guy cut me off. He's a silly driver. And say that with a smile on my face, right? There's a choice, right? If you can see that analogy there. And so there are many things in life which you have no control over, and it's a choice between whether you feel happy about that or not, or whether you feel angry about that or not. Whether it's the progression of a global pandemic, or a meteor heading for Earth, or simply like a stock price going up or down, right? Worrying about these things is a waste of time. It's a waste of time at best, and it's physically debilitating at worst, right? I'm sure you know of the phenomenon of having the shakes, right? Like being so anxious that you have this kind of like incredibly kind of closed over body language and really kind of like this posture that shows that you are an anxious person. And you shake and it literally changes the way that you hold your body, right? So that's how severe this can be. It's not just a cherry on top kind of bit of advice here. It will change the way you live in terms of how you hold yourself, right? And I feel this way about world news as well, because this is a big one. World news, in essence, is basically a bunch of stuff, bunch of bad stuff going on in the world that you can do nothing about. But people buy it up, right? And there's reasons around that because, well, basically it's the evolutionary principle of, well, if there's danger in the environment, you should probably be aware of it. If there's potentially a lion in the bush, you should probably be aware of it because the lion could eat you. But the thing is, the lions we have now can't eat us through the TV screen, right? So although there's a reason psychologically why we might be wired to watch it, it's silly because it won't ever affect us, right? And I know that sounds a little bit selfish because, bad things happening in, strange parts of the world that you don't know anything about. Yeah, sure. Like my prayers go out to those people. But if there's nothing I can do, there's no point in me watching and being aware of that, right? Like what they're saying is basically like, look at all this bad stuff happening, right? That you can do nothing about. And so that's why I find it a bit nonsensical to watch world news and kind of pay attention to these horrible things going on. They are selling fear and we're buying it up. And that doesn't really make sense to us, to me at least, right? So in this situation, of course, it's not going to be as easy as flipping a switch, right? There's going to be an ongoing mental conversation that goes on that you need to have with yourself. So maybe your instinctual reaction might be anxiety in a certain scenario. You've got to ask yourself, why do I feel that way? What is it specifically that's making me feel that way? So you might make a list here. You might write things down, right? And this isn't like, so this might be a very effortful process for you at the start. And there's nothing wrong with that at all, right? These bits of advice, they still work even when you're like a lot further down the journey, but they're equally useful at the start as well. So don't feel silly for doing these things. They are very useful things to do. And if you want to feel like that character, like Oogway or like Master Shifu or, these characters I talked about at the start, then these things are the necessary path. So you begin to understand as you write this list what it is that you're actually worried about. And then you can decide, okay, is it stuff that I can control or is it stuff that I can't control? And if you can't control them, then you can decide, okay, I can be at peace with these things. And then you're able to convince yourself because these things are written down, or maybe you've repeated them in your brain, you understand that you can relax about these things because, you've listed them out and you know what they are and you've determined there's nothing you can do, right? This conversation might be a longer one. It might require writing things down to cement these concepts. And of course, in reality, most things are a bit of a combination of things you can control and can't control. And it's your job to kind of identify correctly which category these things can fall into, right? And in that, we come to talking about the next concept, which is the belief. So the belief. I have another story. But let's get back in Andy and Bert for this story again, because I feel like these are very useful characters that can be used in this scenario as well. So the reason I felt it necessary to talk about belief as well was because the knowledge is great, it's fantastic, but it can be used somewhat counterproductively in the fact that, well, if we keep saying, oh, it's out of my control, there's nothing I can do, then we get a bit lazy and unproductive about it. We can say things like, okay, it's not my fault, there's nothing I can do, why bother? Basically. And that can lead down a path that is, well, not so great for the success in our life, right? So let's imagine Andy and Bert again here, and they are both out in the rain in some rainy town nearby. And well, let's start a look at Andy. So Andy's the kind of person that would say those phrases that I mentioned before, right? Why bother? Nothing I can do, It's not my fault, basically. He's incredibly upset by the rain, and he tells himself there's nothing to be done and that suffering is inevitable, right? So I'm representing him here by the character on the left. So he just sits down on a bench and he just continues to wallow in his own misery and sadness, and he chooses to focus on how awful the situation is. He's not very proactive. He doesn't go out there and try things. He just kind of sits there and thinks, okay, this is awful for me. And life is a sad story for him, right? From his perspective, and well, for the people around him, maybe life is a sad story for Andy, right? Bert, on the other hand, is a lot more proactive. He searches for a place where he can find an umbrella, and well, failing that, he finds some place where he can take shelter. And he thinks about the scenarios that might kind of come out of that. He's very positive thinking. He might think, if I go to a place where there's shelter, there's probably other people there. Maybe I might meet someone new. I might meet someone interesting there. And he thinks about all these things that might happen despite the fact that he's in a bad situation, right? And let's make it really hard for Bert. Let's say he's out in the middle of nowhere. He's hiking or something like that, right? His thoughts are that, well, he only has himself to blame. And, well, he just tries to make it as good as possible. He walks to lower ground to avoid lightning strikes and maybe avoid the wind a bit. And he spends his time when he gets there marveling at how wonderful nature is or how heavy it's raining. Like the power of nature that he can kind of be forced to move around because of how heavy it's raining, right? He looks at the rain and thinks, this is amazing, right? So from inside Bert's brain, life is a good story. Right? For Andy, life is a sad story. For Bert, life is a good story. Right? So from his perspective and from the stories that he will tell other people later on, people can see that life is a good story for Bert. Right? So what we have here is this definition of a internal and external locus of control between Andy and Bert here. So just to define those terms right now, Andy has a greater belief that his circumstances are in control of his outcomes in life, right? We call this the external locus of control, right? This typically characterize this is typically characterized by qualities such as blaming others, self-pity, entitlement, things like that. And the phrases that these people might use are things like, why bother? It's not my fault. Why do bad things happen to me? Right? It's very kind of things happen to me, right? It's in essence where we point the finger when bad things happen to us. Do we point it outwards? That would be an external locus of control. Do we point it inwards? That would be an internal locus of control, right? And so Andy points the finger outwards, and Bert, on the other hand, points the finger inwards, right? So his qualities are more like proactivity, being action oriented, and having ownership over things, right? And he might say things like, I can make things happen. Like, no matter how bad things get, there's always something I can do. And, I take action in life. Action alleviates anxiety, right? So if we go back to this diagram again, this circle that we drew around this character is somewhat malleable. There are things we can control and there are things we can't control. And we can choose those things, right? We can kind of manipulate reality in a certain sense, or the perception of reality at least, right? And that's the key point here, the perception of reality, what we believe to be true about reality. Right? And that's why I call that sense the belief. And so when we combine these two things, the knowledge and the belief, we have an attitude that is relaxed and can do, and that leads to a place where we can be quite happy about the world around us, right? And there's an extra thing I want to focus on here about the mentality surrounding this, right? I'm not sure if this slide. Okay, so there's a mentality I like to use here. It's called the my fault mentality, right? In essence, it's basically an attitude of really being overwhelmingly or maybe weirdly accepting ownership for things that go wrong in your life. Right. So to summarize this little bit here, because I'm conscious of time here, it's the fact that people take ownership of things that they could totally pin on other people. One story in particular stands out to me here, and it's a story I heard from an American finance expert, right? And early on in his career, he had a business. I think it was some kind of real estate business, and he hired an employee to keep his accounts, right? To write up the accounts so that the government can check them and kind of like say that they're correct and he could pay the right taxes and things like that. And so he hired someone who was perhaps a little bit dubious and was quite cheap for that job. And so one day he gets a phone call and it says basically, something's been screwed up here and you've got a massive fine and you're going to have to bankrupt your business, right? A business he'd been building for a couple of years and this was like his everything and he had to kind of solve that situation and it like almost destroyed everything he'd built up until then. And it was, well, as a result of a mistake that this employee had made or something like that. And so what I was watching at the time was an interview of the interviewer asking him a certain question. He asked him, whose fault was that? Right? I guess it was a kind of testing question. And he said, well, I believe it was my fault, right? Even though the employee screwed up, I hired the employee. I didn't make any checks to kind of make sure that he was doing the right thing. And so I take responsibility because ultimately it's I have to do that. And so they ended up having a discussion about this, continuing from this question. And it pretty much concluded the fact that successful people in life, generally speaking, take full ownership of the world around them, even though they could easily justify things and blame it on other people. And it's generally something that leads to success more in life, right? If we think of all the greats in life, right? In sports, Kobe Bryant, in the world of finance in general or tech, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, they did not have an attitude of blaming others. They took ownership, blamed themselves, and saw what they could do and had that power of belief to move forward and change the world. So, in conclusion, right, there is something I like here about something called the Serenity Prayer. So, this seems a bit unrelated, okay? But this one quote, it comes from a different place. It comes from, I guess, Christianity. And it's a quote that kind of has a bit of wisdom to it that people like to repeat for an affirmation, things like that. But for me, it really brings together the two things we've been talking about today. In a weirdly, like, it really clicks into place here. So let me read this to you and see if you can kind of get that clicking as well. It says, God grant me serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Okay. So I'm going to read that one more time. But each of these lines lines up pretty much exactly with what we've been talking about today. Okay. So it says, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. That's the knowledge, by the way. Courage to change the things I can. That's the belief. And then the wisdom to know the difference, basically combining the two. So, what this is for me is a reminder of what the locus of control means and how we can apply it in our lives, right? I just found that a really cool thing that like these two kind of seemingly unrelated things can come together and just like fit really well, like puzzle pieces. I find that really cool. So that's basically the concluding statement. And next time I'll be talking about the taming the inner beast. But for now, that's it for the locus of control. So yeah, if you have any questions, we'll take it away from here.
Yeah, Dylan, awesome presentation, man. You killed it. That was really cool. I appreciate your backstory. I got to learn more about you. I really appreciate how you tied everything together. And what's really cool, I'm going to tie this into the lucid path. Okay, so that, excuse me, excuse me. Okay, so the Serenity Prayer, I was thinking about that while you were going through this presentation, and so I'm really glad that you brought it up at the end. That really, you're right, it does tie everything together, and I love that prayer. Um, what was coming up for me though, and this is a big reason why I created the Lucid Path, is because um, so when I was in a program called Alcoholics Anonymous, it's a 12-step program, and there's other variations of it. They say the Serenity Prayer in there over and over. Like it's just they start their meetings with the Serenity Prayer, and I've really learned to love this, and I do appreciate what the Serenity Prayer offers. But what I found is in those programs, our our first step is to say that we're powerless over a substance. And basically what that says is that the substance has more control than I do over me. And and so I went through this program for a while with that, using that, but something just wasn't sitting right. It just didn't. I would say the Serenity Prayer every day, literally asking God to grant me the serenity to change the things that, or the courage to change the things. Oh my gosh, I'm getting messed up even though it's right in front of me. Um, man, we would say it every day, and I just was like, man, like there's just something not right here. Why? I appreciate asking God for help, but if I were to mess up and like take a drug or something or drink alcohol that I've been praying to not do, who would I blame in this situation though? Because I've been praying to God to take away something that I can't do. So then am I supposed to get mad at God? Like, no, I get mad at myself because I'm the one that took it. And so that the whole thing didn't sit right with me. And I never could fully believe that I was powerless over this because I'm the one taking the steps to not drink or use drugs. Like I'm the one doing that. It might be with God's help, but I'm the one doing it, you know? Um, and so that's a big portion of why I created the Lucid Path, was to start to create autonomy in a person so that they can have their own power and overcome their addiction at the same time without becoming powerless and without giving away um, their power, or like to give away something that belongs to them, like literally an essence of themselves. So this presentation was beautiful, and I really appreciate how all of these things are coming together, man. And thank you for letting me add that piece in. And I do have quite a few questions.
Go ahead. Yeah, of course.
Cool. So, um, okay, so okay, a couple of these are comments, things that I'm relating to. So the first thing that I noticed was that I really appreciate that when you're sharing about this. I know I told you this before, but I can really feel your heart in this project. And that just like, man, when somebody shares their heart, it means so much more than somebody who's just doing something because they think it's the right way. Like you're tuned into yourself, man, and it's very obvious. So thank you. I'm really glad that you're here doing this. Not just on my platform, but the fact that you're doing it for you and sharing your heart with the world, man, that's a big deal. Okay. Um, I'm
Thank
curious to
you.
know, how old are you?
I just turned 25.
Oh, you're 25. Okay, that's
Yes.
awesome, man. Yeah, you've definitely got a good grasp on things for your age. I mean, I'm 29. I'm not much older, but it's really cool.
Thank you.
Um, I wrote the word outside with a question mark, and I can't remember what that was for. Um, I wanted to share something with you as well that, yeah, I could relate to your story of you would write a lot. You would express yourself through words in a notebook and stuff. And then at some point you threw that away. And I did the same thing. I wrote in so many notebooks. I would write raps and poetry and stuff. And then at some point in my journey, I think I was embarrassed too, or just like I'd never thought I was going to use it, and literally threw a whole shoebox of notebooks I had filled. I just threw them all away, man. And at some level, I I want to say I regret it, but I mean I don't because it all happens for a reason, you know. But
Yeah.
yeah, I really related with that. Um, Something that I learned from you was you were mentioning about like ups and downs and how like the monk um he's not too happy, he's not too upset, or you know, he's kind of just in his center. And what I realized when you said that is like finding your true center, you can kind of just let everything move around you and you don't have to um like give in to anything. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I can. I mean, so it's the notion that there is no such thing as a negative or positive emotion, really, right? And this is something I actually talk about in the next part, Taming the Inner Beast. That's actually about emotions, right? And so I talk about the fact that there are ways to control your anger and ways to think about controlling your emotions. And most people think about that kind of concept and they think, okay, that's about controlling anger. That's about controlling anxiety. That's about controlling sadness, for example. But it's the same with happiness. Like I like to give the example of, for example, let's say something really cool happened, you want to celebrate, and let's say, in the past when you've celebrated, perhaps when you've drunk alcohol or like, done something like that, and you've done irresponsible things, maybe you get really happy, you dance on tables and you break things, and perhaps that hasn't been the best in the past. So there is a way to kind of control the anger and say, okay, maybe I'm not going to drink as much this time when I'm celebrating. I can celebrate in other ways. I can have cake. I can, be with the people I love, but I just need to draw a boundary between myself and alcohol, for example, because I know that alcohol makes me do silly stuff when I'm too happy, right?
Mhm.
It's like that, right? And with other feelings, like, I don't know, so happiness, like what other happy or positive emotions are there? But I think you get the picture, right? It's the same, and there just needs to be kind of an element of control rather than like they're not good or bad, right? So I think that even supposedly negative emotions can be useful and good for you in different scenarios. Like for example, like aggression and violence. If you control aggression and violence, for example, that is basically a martial arts class, right? And
Yeah.
so it's the way you see it and the way you kind of control it. I think the element that's most useful is the control part of it, right? So that monk character that I talked about, he just has things under control. He has his anger under control, he has his happiness under control, and nothing can like make him feel so so much emotion that it kind of destroys him. He's in control of those things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's kind of what think I'm hearing you say is like, you know, we just are, and these emotions kind of swim around us, but we experience them. Like we experience what they feel like, but that doesn't mean that we have to react to them and move forward. Like if like you were saying, like if I'm feeling a specific emotion, I don't have to like take actions on it just because I feel that way. It doesn't mean that the way that I'm feeling makes me right about a situation or anything. It just it's just my expression.
Indeed, yeah.
Cool, man. Um yeah, and finally, I really appreciated what you were talking about with the world news analogy. I definitely see a lot of people that like just get caught up in all of that, and And I actually just recently had a conversation with someone and they asked me like, what's my opinion on this thing? And I just told them like, I don't even care. Like, I don't care because it doesn't affect me. It's not in my world, but like if it came into my world, like if it was affecting something, then sure, I would take notice of it and we would work through it. But I mean, currently it's not current. So like
Yeah.
I don't know. It's not in my field. It's not something that I'm actually moving towards. I'm not trying to create something with it. Like it's just not there for me. And I don't think they really understood what I was saying. And that's
Yeah.
okay. It's all
Yeah.
good. I'm not here to judge or anything, but um yeah, I really appreciated that. And I really appreciate the what you shared here today. It was really powerful.
Fantastic, man. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no doubt, man. Is there anything that you want to say before I close the recording?
Uh, Not much. I mean, well, you can find me by typing my name into, if you've got my name, type into YouTube or Instagram, you'll find me there. And yeah, that's about it.
Awesome. Everybody, Dylan Alexander, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, let's